Okay, so get this right. Today, we're diving deep, deep into the mind of a Roman emperor.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is, but like not just any emperor. We're talking Marcus
But
Aurelius.
the Stoic guy?
Exactly. You've probably heard of him, right? I mean, he's kind of a big deal, especially, in philosophy.
Yeah, his meditations are pretty famous.
The meditations, that's what we're diving into. We've got excerpts from those writings, plus we'll throw in some like historical background about his life and times.
Context is key.
Totally. And some extra info on Stoicism in general, too, just to make sure we really get what he was all about.
Right, because emperor and philosopher, that's a pretty wild combination.
It is, right. It's fascinating. Emperor of Rome dealing with like all the craziness that comes with that job.
Wars, rebellions, the whole shebang.
Exactly. But then in his private journals, he's all about Stoicism,
Yeah.
this philosophy of virtue and reason, especially when things are chaotic.
Yeah, it's all about finding that inner peace, even when the world around you is going bonkers.
So counterintuitive, right? You'd think someone with that much power would be more interested in, well, flexing that power.
Using it to their advantage, for sure.
Yeah, but Aurelius seems way more drawn to this idea of self-control, like finding that inner stillness even in the middle of all the external craziness.
Makes you wonder what he'd think of the world today, huh? So much chaos everywhere you look.
I know, right? But getting back to Aurelius, what I find even more interesting is that he got into Stoicism super young.
Oh yeah, I read that somewhere. Wasn't he like 11 years old?
11, can you imagine? Like, I was still all about cartoons and sugary cereal that age.
Ha, right.
Yeah.
But apparently, he was already embracing that simple lifestyle, all the discipline that Stoics were known for.
So it wasn't just a phase for him, Stoicism was woven into his life, from childhood all the way to ruling an empire. Why do you think it resonated so much with him, especially given his, crazy position?
Hmm. Well, think about it. He's got the weight of the entire Roman Empire on his shoulders.
That's a lot of pressure.
Right. Constant threat of war, betrayal, you name it. Plus, absolute power can really mess with a person.
Corrupting, yeah.
Exactly. So Stoicism, with its focus on virtue, on accepting what you can't control, it could have been like a mental and emotional anchor for him, a way to stay grounded.
Yeah, like finding that center in the middle of a storm, and man, did he face some storms. Wars on multiple fronts, that horrific plague that swept through the empire.
And wasn't there, like, a revolt led by one of his own generals?
Yes, Avidius Cassius tried to take the throne from him.
Oh.
Wild, right?
Talk about a trail. So how did he react? I mean, you'd think he'd go full-on Roman emperor rage, right?
Surprisingly, no. And that's where you really see Stoicism influencing his actions. He doesn't just hide away in the palace, he leads armies. He's out there organizing relief efforts during the plague.
Wow. Putting those Stoic principles into practice.
Yeah, and get this, he even expressed regret that he couldn't pardon Cassius.
Seriously. The guy who tried to overthrow him?
I know, right? It's like a radical act of forgiveness shows you how deeply Stoicism was ingrained in him. It wasn't just theory, it was his life.
That's incredible.
And speaking of putting these ideas into action, I was reading Book I of the Meditations, and there's this one quote that really stood out. Aurelius talks about how he learned something from every single person in his life.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one. Like, even the people who weren't exactly role models.
Exactly. His family, teachers, even people he didn't particularly like. He saw it all as shaping who he became. He was grateful for all of it, the good and the bad.
Very Stoic. It's that whole idea that even difficult or like flawed people can teach you something valuable.
If you're open to it, yeah.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're all connected in some way and that every interaction, every experience, it all contributes to your growth.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like, how do we approach our own relationships and challenges?
For sure.
Do we see obstacles as roadblocks or as opportunities for learning? Aurelius definitely took that second approach, even as emperor.
Yeah. Always looking for the lesson, even in the tough stuff.
Exactly. And there was this other quote that stuck with me, too. He talks about rubbing out impressions, like wiping the mental slate clean every day, starting fresh.
Oh, yeah. I love that one. It's so powerful.
It is. What's the Stoic thinking behind that, though?
Well, they believed that it's not so much the external events that cause us suffering, but our thoughts and judgments about those events.
So it's about choosing how we react.
Exactly. By learning to control our impressions, like how we perceive and react to things, we gain this sense of, like, agency. We become more resilient even when things are rough.
So it's not about ignoring challenges, it's about choosing how we respond to them. I can get behind that. But
Mhm.
now things are about to get a little more cosmic. Aurelius talks about this fiery ether, the constant cycle of change, and how everything is interconnected. I'll be honest, this part kind of blew my mind a little.
Yeah, it can get pretty heady for sure.
It's deep stuff.
So basically, the Stoics believed that the universe is governed by this rational principle, like a divine fire or breath that's in everything.
Okay.
And it's not some distant hands-off God. It's an active force constantly shaping and reshaping the world through change.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. But how does this grand view of the universe, the fiery ether and all that, how does it connect to how we should live our lives? What's the practical takeaway?
Well, that's the beauty of Stoicism. It connects the cosmic and the personal. If everything is interconnected and part of this rational divine force, then we have a responsibility to live in harmony with it. So that means embracing virtue, reason, justice, because those principles reflect the universal order.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
And it also means recognizing our shared humanity, that we're all citizens of this world, bound together by this like cosmic thread. We're all in this together, basically.
Ugh, that makes it so much clearer. It's like finding your place in the grand scheme of things. I'm starting to understand why Marcus Aurelius's meditations still resonate with people today.
Yeah, it's not just some dusty old philosophy book,
It's like a guide to navigating life, figuring out what matters, dealing with challenges, and remembering we're not alone in it all.
Absolutely. And this idea of interconnectedness, it really comes through when we look at how Aurelius talks about those universal anxieties we all face, like the fear of death, dealing with difficult people.
And finding purpose in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe we should save that exploration for part 2 of our deep dive. Give everyone a chance to process all this cosmic stuff.
You read my mind. We've
Right.
got a lot more to unpack, so stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started. All right, so last time we were talking about Marcus Aurelius and how he used Stoicism, right?
Yeah. Philosopher emperor dealing with all that pressure.
Exactly. And he seemed to find this inner strength through Stoicism. But how did that play out when it came to those big universal anxieties, the things we all struggle with no matter who we are, like the fear of death, dealing with difficult people, and finding meaning when the world's always changing?
Right. The big questions.
Exactly. So let's start with the fear of death. How did Aurelius approach that?
Well, he had this really interesting way of reframing it. He saw life as kind of like a voyage.
A voyage.
Yeah, like a journey. With calm seas sometimes and then, storms too.
Makes sense. Life definitely throws some storms our way.
And the Stoics believed that if you focused on what you could control, your actions, your thoughts, you could weather those storms and reach your destination.
So it's not about pretending you're not afraid of death. It's about finding that inner stability.
Exactly. That sense of control, even when everything around you feels chaotic.
I like that a lot. But what about finding meaning? How did Aurelius reconcile this idea of a constantly changing universe with our human desire for something that lasts, something to believe in?
Well, that's where this concept of living in accordance with nature comes in.
Okay, here we go again with the nature. So I'm kidding, I'm kidding. But seriously, I always found that phrase a bit vague. What did it actually look like for Aurelius? Give me a concrete example.
Sure, sure. Let's take his reflections on death. There's this passage in the Meditations where he compares humans to vines, like vines that bear fruit every season.
Okay.
And he's saying, essentially, that even though things might seem to end, there's always potential for new beginnings.
Ah, so it's like a metaphor for the cyclical nature of life.
Exactly. Death is just part of that natural process.
That's a really powerful image. Take some of the sting out of it, But what about those everyday challenges, like dealing with difficult people?
Oh, we've all been there, right?
For sure. And I'm betting even Roman emperors had to deal with some difficult folks. So what did Aurelius say about that?
Well, he had some surprisingly relevant advice. He encouraged people to try and understand the motivations behind people's actions, see them as products of their own experiences, their beliefs.
So instead of just reacting with anger or frustration?
You take a step back, try to cultivate some empathy, some compassion.
Easier said than done, I think, especially when someone's really pushing your buttons. But yeah, I can see how shifting your perspective like that could help you stay calm.
Right. It's about recognizing you have a choice in how you respond. And that choice has a huge impact on your well-being. You're not letting external stuff dictate your internal state.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But there's one thing that keeps nagging at me. We've talked about Aurelius's emphasis on virtue, compassion, this interconnectedness of all things. But then there's this historical fact. He allowed the persecution of Christians during his reign. How does that fit in with his seemingly, enlightened philosophy?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And it shows how tricky it can be to apply ancient philosophies to modern situations.
Right. It's like, did he really walk the walk?
And it's crucial to remember that the Roman Empire had a very different understanding of religion and politics than we do today.
So are you saying we should just excuse it as like, oh, well, that's just how things were back then?
Not exactly. It's more about recognizing that even individuals we admire can hold views that clash with our modern
Hmm.
sensibilities. It's an opportunity to really wrestle with the nuances of history.
I guess that's fair. So what was going on with the persecution of Christians then?
Well, it was largely political,
Okay,
actually.
cool.
Yeah, it stemmed from their refusal to participate in the state religion.
Ah, so it wasn't so much about religious intolerance, but more about loyalty to the empire.
Exactly. Back then, religion and politics were totally intertwined. Refusing to take part in state-sanctioned rituals was seen as like an act of rebellion.
Wow, things were so different back then. It's a good reminder that even the most philosophical minds are shaped by their time, I guess. But even with this, complicated historical baggage, I still find Aurelius's meditations incredibly insightful. It feels like there's always something new to discover, a fresh perspective to consider.
I completely agree. That's what's so amazing about these philosophical texts. They challenge us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to connect ancient wisdom to our own modern experiences.
It's crazy how these ideas from like centuries ago still feel so relevant today.
No, right.
I mean, here we are, still wrestling with the same anxieties about life and death and purpose and meaning.
Like Marcus Aurelius is right there with us.
Totally. It just goes to show, I guess, that some human concerns are just like timeless.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the power of philosophy, really. These big questions, they transcend time and culture.
For sure. And grappling with them, even if there aren't any easy answers, well, it's part of what makes us human, right?
Definitely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius, what are some key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with?
Yeah, like what are those aha moments that might stick with them?
Well, I think one of the most powerful and practical
Mm.
ideas is that Stoic focus on what you can control. Aurelius constantly reminds us that we can't always control external events,
Right, life throws curveballs.
but we can choose how we respond. We have control over our thoughts, our emotions, our actions.
It's about like taking ownership of your inner world, even when the outer world feels totally chaotic. And I think that ties into another big idea we talked about, living in accordance with nature. I'll admit, when I first heard that phrase, I was like, wait, do I need to like go live off the grid and grow my own vegetables?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it sounds a little extreme at first.
But it's not about that, is it?
Not at all. It's more about understanding and accepting the natural order of things, like the cycles of change, the fact that death is a part of life.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're part of something bigger, something that operates according to like certain principles.
And finding peace in that.
Yeah, it's like, be engaged in the world, strive to make a difference, but also accept that some things are just out of your hands. And that's actually like a pretty powerful way to deal with anxiety, isn't it?
I think so. It's a very stoic approach.
Totally. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to touch on, that stoic emphasis on interconnectedness.
Ah,
Remember
yes.
the fiery ether, that rational principle that connects everything in the universe? That's pretty profound.
It is.
It suggests that our actions, no matter how small, have ripple effects, kind of like that butterfly effect thing.
Exactly. We're all part of this huge web of cause and effect.
It really makes you think about the impact you want to have,
Yes, it does. And that brings us to a final provocative thought for our listeners.
Ooh, I like it. Hit us with it.
Aurelius, he often reflected on the vastness of time
Mm.
and how human existence is actually pretty fleeting.
Right, we're just a blip in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. He wrote about how quickly we're all forgotten. Even the greatest empires eventually crumble.
Heavy stuff. So, what's the question we should be asking ourselves?
Well, if our time is limited and we're all interconnected, how do we want to spend that precious time we have? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
Wow. Okay, that is a powerful question. It's both humbling and inspiring.
It is, isn't it? It makes you think about what really matters, what values you want to live by, and the mark you want to make on the world.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners to ponder those big questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Marcus Aurelius. We hope you found some nuggets of wisdom to take with you on your own journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.